welcome everyone to another virtual Drasha for the last days of Pesach. I first would like to express my condolences to the family of Jerry Rubin, who passed away. There will be a private funeral service on Friday, and Shiva information will be sent out via email. Unfortunately, many of us are feeling spiritually lacking for a variety of reasons during this Chag, during this holiday. And one group of people is specifically feeling spiritually lacking, and that is those who want to remember a loved one in a traditional manner. And yet, in the current pandemic, we cannot do so. We cannot recite Kaddish because there are no minyanim. We cannot bury someone with a large crowd. We are limited by the rules and regulations of the various cemeteries. And now, those of us who recite Yizkor will be forced to do so alone, without the power of the community. Hence, we feel spiritually lacking when we attempt to give kavod, when we attempt to pay our respects to our loved ones who have passed on. And I would like to ask the following question. What should we do about this? And what can we do about this? How should we feel when we recite Yizkor in the privacy of our own homes on the 8th day of Pesach, without the comfort of the community to strengthen us? Perhaps in order to answer this question, we should ask ourselves a more basic question about the recitation of Yizkor on Pesach, for that matter. Why do we recite Yizkor on Yom Tov in the first place? If you think about it, the essence of Yom Tov is that Yom Tov is a day of a time of simcha. It's a time of happiness to such an extent that there is no avelus, there is no mourning that takes place on Yom Tov. Yom Tov is a day of simcha. So why on Yom Tov, which is a time of simcha, a time of such great joy and happiness, why do we recite Yizkor, which obviously evokes tremendous sadness? Why do we recite Yizkor on Yom Tov to begin with? Interestingly, originally the custom of reciting Yizkor was limited to the holiday of Yom Kippur. The Sifri comments on a verse in the Torah in the context of the mitzvah of Egla Arufa. The pasuk says, "Kaper la'amcha asher padisa," atone for the nation that you have redeemed. Says the Sifrei, "Kaper la'amcha," this refers to the living, and asher padisa, this refers to the dead, meaning that we ask for atonement for both the living and the dead. And in fact, the Gemara in Erechim writes that the books of life and death are opened on Yom Kippur. We attempt to achieve kapara, we attempt to achieve atonement for both the living and the dead on Yom Kippur. And this is why the Mordechai writes that there is a custom to give charity on Yom Kippur. It is based on the Sifri, and the Ramah quotes this Mordechai as the halacha. So now I understand the function of Yizkor on Yom Kippur. But what about on the other holidays? I understand that in Yom Kippur we need atonement, and we achieve atonement for the living and the dead. So that's why we recite Yizkor, we give charity on their behalf. But what about on the other holidays, on Pesach, on Shavuos, on Shmini Atzeres? We're not trying to achieve atonement on Pesach, so why do we recite Yizkor? Rabbi Simcha, one of the famous Talmidim, one of the famous students of Rashi, who wrote the Machzor Vitri, wrote that one should collect charity on the last days of Yom Tov, because on the last days of Yom Tov, in the Torah reading, we recite Ish Kamatnas Yado. We read about the mitzvah of giving charity, and the Levush writes that since we are giving charity, we recite Yizkor for the deceased so that they can achieve atonement. But for me, at least the difficulty with this analysis is, why atonement on the last day of Pesach? Okay, we recite Ish Kamadas Yado, we're talking about charity. So now we try to achieve atonement, but why are we doing that on the last day of Pesach? What does Pesach have to do with atonement? I think the question is stronger than the answer. I did a little research and I discovered that in the 16th and 18th and the 17th and 18th centuries, the recitation of Yizkor on Yom Tov was known as a Polish minhag. It wasn't a universally, widely accepted minhag. And it seems from some of the sources around this time that according to this Polish minhag, they actually viewed Yizkor as a method for how the deceased's merits can help us. It's not a focus on them, on how we can help them. It's actually a focus on how they can help us. However, maybe there's a different approach to understanding why we recite Yizkor on the holiday of Pesach. About 6 years ago, David Brooks wrote a piece in the New York Times about suffering, and he explained that we live in a culture that loves to talk about happiness. And what was true 6 years ago is certainly true today. That being said, he wrote, notwithstanding the focus on happiness, ultimately when people remember the past, they often describe and they feel formed through suffering. In some strange way, they feel ennobled by suffering. And he gives the example of Franklin Roosevelt, who came back deeper and more empathetic after being struck with polio. He writes that suffering drags us deeper into ourselves as it gives us a more accurate picture of our own limitations, what we can control and what we cannot control. It gives us a fuller picture of our true selves. And perhaps this is why we recite Yizkor on the last day of Yom Tov. Because Yom Tov is all about the unadulterated joy. Celebrating our beautiful history, our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, standing lifnei Hashem before God in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, in the times of the temple. It's all good. Yom Tov is all happiness, no avelus, no mourning. Yom Tov is a time where we're all feeling, or we should feel, only tremendous joy. Everything is good, everything is wonderful. But that, of course, is not the full picture. There is much sadness in our lives. We can never have another Pesach Seder with a mother or with a father who has passed on. We can no longer take a Chol HaMoed trip with a spouse who has passed away. We try to forget, and we are supposed to forget about this sad aspect of the holiday for most of the holiday. Because for most of the holiday, we are consumed, and we are supposed to be consumed with simcha. But before we leave this holiday, we have to confront this sadness. We have to reflect. And this reflection, this recitation of Yizkor can be sad, but it can also be extremely ennobling. Because maybe true happiness is an opportunity for us to reflect about all that our parents or our spouse or other relatives, for that matter, have contributed to our lives. True simcha is the knowledge that their legacy continues with us and with all those that they have influenced. True happiness is not wearing rose-colored glasses that everything is great. But it's about digging deep inside of ourselves and asking ourselves, what is true happiness for a Jew? And that is living a life of holiness and appreciating all that we are because of those that have come before us. Yes, we give honor to a loved one by reciting Kaddish or by reciting Yizkor, but the Kaddish and the Yizkor only provide the formal, technical opportunity to reflect. The inner experience of remembering a loved one is living our lives as a continuation of the lives of our loved ones. In Tenuat HaMusar it is recorded that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter once came to shul for the yahrzeit of his father. There was another person there who had yahrzeit for his daughter, who Rahman al-Islam died at a young age. In that shul, only one person said Kaddish at a time. So the rules, the technical halachic rules would have dictated that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter be the one to recite Kaddish, because Kaddish for a parent takes precedence over Kaddish for other family members. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, though, saw how upset the individual was and allowed him to be the one to recite Kaddish. All of the people in the room looked stunned. Is this the way that the great Baal HaMusar, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, honors his father by giving up his Kaddish at the day of his yahrzeit? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter answered that the schus, that the merit of doing chesed for this other individual is a greater zechus, is a greater merit than reciting Kaddish. It's the inner experience of chesed. It's the continuing the legacy of a loved one which brings us simcha. And yes, it's so difficult that most of us cannot say Kaddish or Yizkor with a minyan or have a large gathering at funerals. But we can pay tribute and honor our loved ones by simply continuing their legacy, by learning each day in their memory, by giving charity in their memory, by thinking about what mitzvah or character trait they were known for in their lives and committing to working harder on that midah or mitzvah in our own lives. In a world of COVID-19, it is definitely much harder to connect to a loved one who has passed away without the formal rituals of reflection. The Kaddish or the Yizkor recitation with the entire community. But in truth, we have everything that we need. We have everything that we need to fully experience Simchas Yom Tov, the joy of Yom Tov, even as we recite the Yizkor in the privacy of our own homes. Have a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.